Welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. My name is Mark Gorash. I am here with Free Press Detroit Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold. After a 3-3 week, Ev, you got to sleep in your own bed a couple of times. You got to see the Cats, and most of all, you got to see Savannah. You didn't get to see a lot of offense. How you feeling?
Yeah, not a lot of offense, but a whole lot of Savannah, which was awesome this week. It's tough being on the road so much, especially with the way the season started. Coming back from spring training, then having to go to Chicago, and then it's New York, and to come home for a little bit. Even though there was the 2-game series in Pittsburgh, I've spent a lot of time at home this week, and that's been awesome. So really, really enjoy it. So thankful for Savannah and her amazing cooking, because she really does take care of me. Without her, I wouldn't eat anything. So she definitely does take care of me, and it's appreciated. But yeah, not a whole lot of offense. But a 3-3 week, Tigers are 9-6 overall. I think that's a good sign. I don't know how they split the series with the Minnesota Twins, but somehow they did. I don't think they deserved to, but they came out of there with 2 wins in 4 games against an American League Central rival. And that's how the week has been so far. 1-1 against the Pirates, 2-2 against the Twins, 3-3 week, 9-6 overall.
Well, all I can say about the Minnesota Twins is they feel the same way about this series that the Detroit Tigers do, which is, how do we only win 2 games? Okay? I'm sure the Twins feel that way, and I can promise you the Tigers should feel that way, because the way they gave away the game in the first game of yesterday's doubleheader, which we'll talk about later, was pretty little league-ish at best. It's been, fun to watch baseball. It's just not fun to watch this baseball. So let's talk a little bit about getting into the big 2. So let's get right into it. Yes, I am tired of rainouts. I was happy to see 80-degree weather and the baseball flying when it's supposed to fly, instead of hitting the ball and having it fall 10 feet short of the fence because it's 50 degrees and the wind's blowing in. That's no fun. Question 1 of the big 2. Is this really the caliber of offense we're going to watch for 162 games this season?
It's a disaster, isn't it? It's pretty exhausting to watch on a day in, day out basis. It's one of those things where you hope that guys are going to turn things around. You hope that the bats are going to start to warm up, but there's that little voice in the back of your head that says, what if this is all there really is? What if this is all the Tigers are really going to provide? What if, I understand that, look, when you look up and down the lineup and you see guys I don't know, what if Javier Baez bats 140 for the rest of the season? What if Mark Canha is really a 220 to 240 hitter, but he has a really good on-base percentage? Sure, that's what we've seen so far. Kerry Carpenter might just be a 270 hitter. Riley Green, 236. I think he's going to, do a lot better than that. But I don't know, Spencer Torkelson batting 222. Is this all that he's going to be with limited power? Really no power so far. That might be the case. It's really frustrating to watch an offense that you look at all these different guys and you see the upside in Torkelson and in Parker Meadows and Riley Green, Kerry Carpenter, Javier Baez. I think he has unlimited upside because he's somebody who's been really, really good in the past. But none of these guys are really producing. And sure, you can chalk it up to cold weather. You can chalk it up to, trying to get their timing down. All these guys, that's what they've talked about. But at the same time, they haven't produced yet. And that's a problem. That's a concern. It's been a lot of strikeouts recently, especially in this series against the Twins. A lot of lazy pop-ups that have been pretty frustrating to watch. And sometimes not a whole lot of walks. It's been a situation where these guys are striking out a ton, and they're not hitting for power, and they're not hitting for a whole lot of average. The offense has been slow to start. Now, granted, there was a nice stretch where they were scoring in the first inning, but in terms of putting together a ton of runs early and really trying to bury an opponent, before we get into the second half of the game, that hasn't happened. It's been a lot of slow to start and then try to turn it on in the 7th, 8th, 9th, even into extra innings quite a bit this season. And that's not sustainable. And so I think something has to change with the offense. And it really does start with some of the guys that are right in the middle of that. It starts with Spencer Torkelson. It starts with Kerry Carpenter and Riley Green and Colt Keith and Mark Canha. And I understand that Canha has had great at-bats. Colt Keith has had great at-bats. But I can't say the same for Spencer Torkelson. Okay, I can't. And Kerry Carpenter is not going to play against any lefties, so he's only hitting against righties. And Parker Meadows has been terrible at the plate. So, and Riley Green, we know what we're going to get from Riley Green. But my point is we need to see more out of these guys. I really do think.
Well, I don't think it can stay this bad. I don't think there's any possible human way that they could sustain this level of futility. but
I hope not.
They need to get better, or I'm going to have to get a Xanax prescription or something, because it's starting to. I thought I had my rage issues under control like in 2003, but this is definitely bubbling a few of them to the surface as I watch what's going on. I mean, it's tough to watch, dude. It's just an amazing, amazing thing that they've won 9 baseball games so far. I want to bring in some data. Like I said, they've averaged 2.63 runs during the first 8 innings of baseball games this year. That is just futile. I mean, it's ridiculously futile. They've done all their scoring, almost 50% of it, in the 8th, 9th, and extra innings of baseball games. That's just not sustainable to win baseball games. That's A. Okay. All right. Let's go over a few little small pieces of data to the answer of, man, the Tigers are hitting a lot of pop-ups. Guess what? True. We'll play a little game, you and I. We're going to play a little game with some of these statistics, the Petzold-Gorash game of truth or false. Okay. Tigers are hitting a lot of pop-ups. True. 8.3% is their pop-up rate. It's the 4th highest pop-up rate in Major League Baseball. And yes, it seems like Spencer Torkelson is 87% of those pop-ups. Maybe that's true, but
maybe more.
But they are hitting a lot of pop-ups. They're hitting the ball incessantly on the ground. True or false, Evan Petzold?
True.
They're hitting the ball on the ground 42.3% of the time. That's 19th in baseball. So not exactly true. They never hit line drives. True or false?
They don't hit fly balls. I think they hit line drives, though.
Their line drive rate, 27.7%. That is 3rd in Major League Baseball. They are hitting a ton of line drives. Shocking, is it not?
That's not a bad thing.
They have a category on...
That's not a bad thing.
That's not a bad thing. They have a category on Savant called Topped, okay? You would think this is a category that they are just way near the top of. So if I asked you, do you think the Tigers are topping a lot of baseballs? Is that true or false?
I'm going to be completely honest. I have absolutely no idea.
They are topping the baseball 31.7% of the time. That ranks them 11th. So they are just outside of the top 3rd in baseball at topping and hitting the ball weekly. Okay. Not a shock. All right. Some other interesting parts of hitting the baseball well. There's a category called sweet spot. The Tigers are terrible at that, or they're good at that. Your thoughts?
Probably somewhere in the middle. If they have a good line drive rate, then yeah, maybe they're hitting the sweet spot.
Good guess. They are hitting the sweet spot 35.1% of the time. That ranks 10th in Major League Baseball. Much better than irate fans think. And lastly, and most importantly, barrels. Barrels are, what's a quick definition of barrels that we can give down and dirty? It's when you hit the ball, what does it have? Like between 18 and 32% launch angle and an exit velocity, over 97, right? Something like that.
Launch angle is degrees, but yes, it's all changing and it's all moving depending on your specific launch angle and your specific exit velocity. But if you're asking me if the Tigers have a good or a bad barrel rate as a whole, I would probably guess that it's, I don't know. I mean, again, look, this is a team that so far, from what I've seen at least, I think that they've done a poor job of getting the ball in the air, but they've also maybe hit the ball hard just because they've been able to, get as many line drives as they have, but they're not able to get the ball in the air and get that true launch angle. Granted, though, a lot of pop-ups. I would say that they're probably on the low side of the barrel rate. I would probably put them in the bottom 10 of the league in that category just because they haven't done a ton of damage. They haven't hit a ton of home runs. The OPS isn't really high. So I would guess that the barrel rate's pretty low.
Barrel rate 6.9% ranks them 19th in Major League Baseball. Excellent deduction there. So have they got the power swing, the extra base swing, hitting the ball hard that's either going to get it up the alley or out of the ballpark? Not a lot. So bottom line, much better line drive team than you think. Absolutely hitting a ton of pop-ups. In general, not hitting the ball great, but not nearly as poorly as you, I, and 98% of fans in Detroit think. Okay? So facts are facts, people. Can't run away from
something has to change here, Mark. Something has to change. Like they can't, this team cannot continue to perform like they have on offense, especially in the early innings. And what's bothersome to me is this is exactly what they promised. This is exactly what they said was going to happen at the very beginning of spring training. Scott Harris talked about it. Like the offense is going to go through ups and downs with so many young hitters, right? It's going to be volatile. There are going to be times when, the offense struggles, and there are going to be times when, the offense bursts out and they look really good. And as we saw last year too, right? You even think about just Spencer Torkelson, Kerry Carpenter, and Riley Green. There were times last season when those guys looked like the baseball was as big as a beach ball. And then there were also times where they looked completely lost at the plate. And so if that's what we're going to see again, that's what was promised though, right? And I do think that there's something to be said for the fact that this team has 9 wins at this point in the season. And I think a lot of that credit, hat tip to the pitching staff, hat tip to the starters, hat tip to the relievers. Like they have been pretty solid so far this season. The bullpen in particular has been dominant, straight up dominant, handling a ton of innings, super impressive. But Mark, isn't this exactly what Scott Harris and the Tigers said was going to happen this season? That it was going to be up and down. It was going to be a rocky road. There were going to be issues on offense. Like, is that not what they promised? Are we not seeing exactly what was preached in spring training? The very beginning, day one.
Well, look, Evan Petzold has not had the pleasure of being a parent, but I equate this to like being a parent. Being an owner is like being a parent. If your child came to you and said, Dad, I've been working really hard on my schoolwork, but this year, I just don't think I'm going to do that well. I'm setting you up. I'm just letting you know. I just don't think we're going to do real well. How, as a parent, how do you think a parent would respond to that comment before the school year started from their child? How would you take it if you were a parent?
Well, I don't think that parent would be calling their child the AL Central champs.
So my answer
I'm
is,
getting at.
If you're making excuses for probably poor performance before the season starts, then and your job was to assemble a roster to be competitive, you're probably not doing a great job. So, and I'm going to leave it at that. But the bottom line is, do I think they could have done a better job of assembling a more competitive offense than they did? Yeah, they could have. Okay.
We need to keep talking about this, Mark, because what happens, though, if by the end of the season, the Tigers do go through these ups and downs, and we do see a strong second half from Spencer Torkelson again, and Riley Green is really that all-star player that we all thought he was going to be, and maybe it took some of these growing pains to get these guys where they are. What if Parker Meadows is a serviceable everyday center fielder who, sure, maybe he's not going to hit 280, but he might hit 230. And it takes these growing pains to get there. And you feel really good about this team going into 2025. And they didn't plug the gaps, right? It wasn't like one of those situations where they went out and they said, maybe Parker Meadows is going to struggle. So let's go get a real center fielder who's really going to be able to hit for us, right? Or, you know what, Cole Keith might struggle. Let's leave him in Toledo. Let's not give him the contract extension because who knows what's going to happen. Or, hey, maybe Torkelson is going to go through his lumps and maybe we move on from him and we go find a different first baseman. Like, I'm not saying that is, the other outcome that could have been, but at the same time, like, isn't it worth giving these guys some runway? Isn't it worth giving them an opportunity to have their ups and downs? And maybe 2025 is more of a target year, or 2026. Like, I don't know. That's how I've always viewed this team, is like, this team is not 2024 built for winning the World Series. Like, maybe they could sneak in and it'd be a surprise and it'd be really impressive. There is an opportunity in the AL Central, but won't there be an opportunity next year too? So like that's where I'm at with this right now. I'm okay with the ups and downs, but I also see why you're frustrated.
Couple things here. A, my Twitter handle is Mark Gorash says, without failure, there's no greatness. So do I believe in failure as part of greatness? Hell yeah. It's all I believe in. It's the entire process of what I believe in. At the same time, you got to tell yourself the truth about what you're seeing. in any circumstance where you're the boss, you got to evaluate, are there success and failure? And is the process being done correctly while you're failing? Or are you just failing because it's just overwhelming for you? And you have to draw a line about why you're failing. Okay. Which leads me into question 2, the big 2, and we'll elaborate on the things you asked me. Question 2 of the big 2, and it really pains me to ask this because I'm a big fan. Should the Tigers send Parker Meadows to AAA Toledo?
So a couple things. I love the person and I love the player, and I think the upside is off the charts. Like, I think Parker Meadows can be a really, really good player. I actually come out of spring training so that I thought that he was going to be able to get American League Rookie of the Year votes because he still has maintained his rookie eligibility. We know his defense is elite. His base running is elite. All he had to do was hit a little bit. He'd probably get some votes. So I'm very high on Parker Meadows with upside. I'm also the same guy who said that Parker Meadows was going to hit below 215 this season. I mentioned that back in the offseason as part of my predictions for the year. So am I surprised? I'm surprised that it's gotten this bad. Yeah. I mean, Parker Meadows, after 14 games playing, he's gone through it. It's .061 batting average. It's a .225 on base percentage. He's lucky that he had those 7 walks that he drew earlier in the season to be able to supplement for the fact that he's just not hitting the ball at all. He's got 2 hits in 33 at-bats, and I thought he was doing a really good job of controlling the strike zone and finding himself in some opportunities to draw some walks, get on base, make some things happen with his legs. Like, when he gets on, anything can happen. And he was doing a really good job of that, especially early in the season, drawing some walks. And you know what? We haven't seen many walks recently because he's chasing a lot of pitches, he's swinging and missing a ton, and he's striking out a lot. It's gotten really bad over the last, 3 or 4 games. After I thought he did a pretty good job of having a good approach, sticking to it, drawing the walks, even though the hits weren't coming. I thought he was doing a good job of getting on base. That hasn't happened anymore. The Tigers have dropped him from the leadoff spot. And yeah, man, it's been a really rough go. Like, it's frustrating to see because Parker Meadows is a guy who is so talented defensively. He is elite on the bases. He does so many good things. He's great in the clubhouse too. He is close to Spencer Torkelson, close to Riley Green. They're a really good group. And he's like a good human being, like a great human being. And to see him struggle is really tough, but market's getting bad. And it makes you wonder, what are they going to do? I think they're going to give him a long leash. I think the defense is going to outweigh what he is doing offensively. The offense is so poor that he's a negative WAR player right now, which should not be the case because of how elite his defense is. But that's where it's at right now. And I understand the concept of sending a guy down to maybe give him more reps, get him going again. But I also think you have to have a good option coming up. Like Akil Baddoo, they're paying him more than $1 million this year as an arbitration player. He's been in AAA Toledo. Is that really the guy that you want replacing Parker Meadows? Do you really want to throw Wenzel Perez in center field every day? And I understand that there are some advantages of having Matt Vierling on the roster, but even Matt Vierling is a below average defensive center fielder. Go look at the metrics. It's pretty obvious. Wenzel Perez, not a great center fielder. Okay, so do you really want to give up defense for hoping to get Parker Meadows back on track? I see both sides. I think that the Tigers, they've won a lot of games because they played good defense. Parker Meadows has had a hand in what they've done defensively to help them win some games. And so you take away Parker Meadows, you take away an elite center fielder, maybe the Tigers don't have 9 wins right now. Maybe they have 8 wins. And I understand that there are 2 sides of this coin. I think they give him a long leash. I think they allow him to figure it out at the big league level. I don't think we see Parker Meadows go anywhere, but I can certainly understand if you have an opposite view and if you disagree with me.
Well, you and I did discuss this a little bit before the show, and we are pretty much at opposite ends of the spectrum. I feel the same way about the player that you do. But at the same time, I think for multiple reasons, if today was not Sunday, and I'm pretty sure Toledo does not play tomorrow, so I tend to doubt they will send him down tonight because Toledo's not playing tomorrow and the Tigers are, and he could be of some use tomorrow. And bringing up Akil Baddoo, I mean, we've seen that show. There's no real upside to bringing up Akil Baddoo. He's not really doing anything at Toledo that warrants a promotion. So, but the bottom line is, here's what I got to say. So I think for 2 or 3 weeks, for 50 at bat, giving Parker Meadows a chance to go to Toledo and find himself, without doing damage to the team. And, he's got 2 hits and 33 at-bats, 39 plate appearances. One of the hits was an infield hit. I think I explained to you, the first 15 at-bats I was fine with. What's been going on for the last 6 or 7 games reminds me of that old thing they used to do between innings at the Tiger game where they had people put their head on a bat and they made them run around in a circle around the bat, and then they took the bat away and they had them go pick something up, and they looked like they were drunk when they were trying to pick it up. That looks like Parker Meadows at bats the last 25 at bats. So I think he's just spinning. There's no good at bats happening. There's no contact being made. Throw right down the middle doesn't matter. And I think if you want Parker Meadows, who is an impact player in so many ways, so many different ways, to have a chance to kind of regroup and come back and contribute, maybe 50 at-bats in Toledo right now is a good idea. And they'll make do for 2 or 3 weeks with Matt Vierling, Wenceel Perez, and even Riley Green some in center field until Meadows kind of rights the ship a little bit. He's doing no good to anybody doing what he's doing right now.
But Mark, here's where I completely disagree with you. I just don't understand. If Parker Meadows goes to AAA Toledo without figuring this thing out in the big leagues, he's going to come back to the big leagues and he's going to have the same problem. Like, I understand, like, mentally the same problem of, like, can I hit in the big leagues? That is a question that will loom. Sure, he might be able to get back on time for fastballs. That's been a really big problem, is the fastball up and away has been a big problem for Parker Meadows, as well as spin down and in. 2 spots that have been really tough for him to hit, and it's caused for a lot of problems. And you're right, he looks completely lost at the plate. But could you imagine what it does for this guy's confidence if he figures it out at the big league level? Like, how much that is a game changer for him if he's able to figure it out. And I understand that it is going to take some time if he figures it out at the big league level, right? Like, maybe it starts tomorrow, but it's not one of those things that in one day, boom, it's locked in. I think that's almost more valuable than going down to Toledo. And at the same time, I don't really know how I feel about sending him down and calling up Akil Baddoo. The only reason I mentioned Akil Baddoo is because he's making $1.55 million. He's on the 40-man roster, and he's an easy guy to call up for 2 weeks. He's not going to play, but what's the point then of having him up here? So, like, I don't know. I see what you're saying. I get it. I think it's important if you're talking about a timing thing or a mechanical adjustment that he needs to make. Like, if that's what it's about, I'm all for it. But if it's just for trying to find the mojo again, I think that's almost more important to do at the big league level, where he's going to have a hell of a lot of confidence coming out of it if he's able to figure this thing out against the Texas Rangers in this upcoming series. Or maybe he takes that to Minneapolis for the road trip and he figures it out in Minneapolis. Or maybe it takes him until he's in Tampa to get it locked in. But if he's finally able to figure it out and get it locked in, I think we're going to see a much more confident Parker Meadows at the plate. Whereas if you send him down to Toledo and then he comes back, there's still the same question. Like, are you going to be able to hit? Yes or no? And you got to figure it out at the big league level still, because the big leagues is a lot different than AAA Toledo. So if it's timing, if it's mechanics, I get it. But at the same time, I don't know, man. I think it'd be really cool to see him figure it out in the big leagues. And I think that's why they're going to give him the leash, especially because the defense is so good. But we'll see.
And I'll give you the reason why they won't. This is not the 2021 Tigers. This isn't the 2022 Tigers. Those teams had no expectations of really winning. This team does. So it's not an experiment to see if I can play or develop if I lose a little bit, it's not a big deal. This team expects to win. They somehow have gone 9-6, and it's like a magic trick that they've done it with this offense. Okay? So to keep hitting a guy, hoping that he finds it, is probably costing you wins in an offense that can't afford an automatic out anymore. They got enough automatic outs that they need to play. So for those reasons, I think the long-term benefit, they're probably going to send him down here. I'll be shocked if they don't. So that's my 2 cents. All right, we're going to take a break. On the other side of the break, we have a super special guest for you, Tigers General Manager Jeff Greenberg. We'll be back with Jeff in a minute.
All right. I'd like to welcome Jeff Greenberg, general manager of the Detroit Tigers, to the Days of Roar podcast. Jeff joined the Tigers as the general manager in September 2023, hired by president of baseball operations Scott Harris. He graduated from Penn in 2008 and Columbia Law in 2011. He spent 11 seasons with the Chicago Cubs from 2012 to 2022 and helped win the World Series in 2016 before joining the NHL's Chicago Blackhawks as an associate general manager. 16 months later, he returned to baseball as the GM of the Tigers. Jeff has now experienced his first offseason, spring training, and opening day with the Tigers, and we're thankful to have him on the Days of Roar podcast for the first time. Jeff, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Evan.
So let's start with what might be the toughest question I'm going to ask you. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off and get it out of the way. Do you have some secret sauce to help this team score more runs? What we saw on Sunday was really impressive. 4 runs in the 8th inning, comeback win against the Minnesota Twins. But look, the starters and relievers have been nails for 2+ weeks, while the hitters just aren't scoring enough runs. I know it's early, but is that an area of concern at this point?
Yeah, I think, it's something we talked a lot about throughout the offseason, heading into spring training. Again, coming into the season, our lineup, we have a young team. We've got young but talented hitters in the middle of our lineup. And, with that youth comes variability, comes some uncertainty. So I don't know that anything we've experienced so far is unexpected. I give our guys a ton of credit. We've been really resilient and resourceful so far this year. We found a way to scratch out runs and wins early in some pretty tight situations and some difficult environments early in the season. Bad weather, long rain delays, double headers, some quirky scheduling. So, it's early in the season. I don't think we're quite 10% into the year. So give our guys a lot of credit for that resiliency. Obviously, we've gotten some really good pitching. Our rotations kept us in games. Our pen's been excellent. They've stepped up in high leverage situations quite a bit. So far, defensively, we've been really strong. We've won some games with our defense just this week alone in Pittsburgh, and since coming home, you saw it again today. So, we found different ways to piece it together. I expect our offense to continue to move forward here, and again, just give our guys credit for finding ways to win games so far.
You mentioned the variability of the young hitters, and of course, we've seen that. And of course, that's something that we expected too. That was something that you guys had talked about even going back to spring training. So with that being said, do you think what we've seen so far, and I know it's only 15 games, it's super early, but solid starting pitching, pretty dominant bullpen, and then maybe a slow to start offense with some up and downs. Does that align with your internal expectations heading into the season?
Yeah, I think so. We were pretty intentional with what we did this offseason, and I think that was a reflection of the fact that we have young but talented position players in our lineup, and we feel it's really important to give our guys that runway, those opportunities. So yeah, that variability, that uncertainty that I referenced, we expected some of that going into the year, and that's why we went out and we got Mark Hanna. He was a target for us, that veteran bat who's going to get on base, veteran presence in the box. I think we've seen that throughout the first few weeks of the season from Mark. Obviously, we added, two veteran pieces to our rotation to bolster that side of the roster. Did the same thing in the pen with guys like Shelby Miller and Andrew Chafin, focusing on that run prevention piece to raise our floor, knowing that we expect our offense to win us some games, but some of that inconsistency is somewhat inevitable with a younger group, and tried to make moves with those things in mind.
Definitely have more questions about the current roster and what we've been seeing, but I do want to learn a little bit more about you as well. So more baseball questions, but I got to shift gears and ask about a different sport. I know you grew up in Pittsburgh and grew up playing hockey. How long did you play the sport, and have you been watching a lot of hockey recently with the Penguins and the Wings as well, making a playoff push?
Yeah, no, I grew up in Pittsburgh. I was born the year after the Penguins drafted Mario Lemieux. So I was sort of like part of that wave in Pittsburgh that came up with Lemieux and those really good Penguins teams in the early 90s, pretty spoiled. They won 2 cups. So I fell in love with the game, fell in love with baseball at the same time. I was definitely a sports nut at a very young age. Pirates were good around the same time. They won the division 3 years in a row. So fell in love with both sports. Started playing hockey and baseball when I was 5. Wasn't great at either. Was probably a little better on the hockey side. I went to Penn. I played on the club team there, and obviously had a really unique opportunity to jump into hockey on the professional side after 16, 17 years of working in baseball. It was an incredible experience. Learned a ton, really enjoyed working with the Blackhawks. And I still try to watch hockey when I can. Obviously, it's not easy in a job like this, but was pretty locked into the Wings game last night. Huge win for those guys, and exciting. They've obviously put themselves in a position to get into the playoffs here with a couple games left. So it's been exciting to follow them and try to get my fix where I can.
At what point did working in baseball become a reality for you? And I guess why didn't you just gravitate towards hockey?
Yeah, so I was in college from fall of 2004, graduated in 2008. And at that time, things like Moneyball had been written while I was in school, and guys like Theo had made a name. He had made a name for himself in Boston, and at that time, it seemed like, okay, maybe there was a path for somebody like myself who wasn't playing at any level at that point, let alone a high level. I love the game. Applied to some internships when I was a sophomore in college, and was lucky enough to get a summer internship with the Pirates, which was home for me. That would have been the summer of 2006. And, fell in love with it right away. It took me probably like half a day into my internship to figure out this is what I want to try to do with my career. And pretty much everything I did from that point forward was geared towards trying to find a way to get into baseball. Did a bunch of internships, went to law school because I thought maybe it could help. Debatable decision, but it served me okay. Spent a summer in Yakima, Washington as a video intern for the Arizona Diamondbacks, spent some time in Major League Baseball. So just tried to accumulate as many experiences as I could at that stage of my life, at that stage of my career. And those are experiences, those are perspectives that I, still find myself trying to tap into every day. So I was, very fortunate to have those opportunities early in my career. And I think it's helped me quite a bit throughout my career.
What do you remember about your first internship with the Pirates I think back in 2006?
It's changed a lot. I mean, we were a pretty small group at that point. I think internships have changed quite a bit. Just the expansion of baseball operations and front offices in general. There's, even at that internship level, there's a little more specialization now. Back then, I got to do a little bit of everything. There were only, on a day-to-day basis, probably, 6 to 8 of us in the office, a couple other interns as well, one of whom was actually David Stearns, who's now the president of the Mets. And so, I just got to jump into everything: pro scouting, amateur scouting, getting ready for the draft, player development, some advanced stuff, some video stuff. So great experience, just being able to see a little bit of everything. I worked with people who were, very accommodating, very inclusive, and was a huge part of who I've become and what I've been able to do.
And then what was it like to growing up, joining the Chicago Cubs? And like when you were there, how did you grow personally and professionally? And also too, like what exactly did you do with the Cubs that really stood out? Like what were your strengths that allowed you to, go from where you were when you started to where you were when you ended as assistant general manager, and just have kind of maybe, stayed with you this whole time?
Yeah, I feel so fortunate to have that experience, to have had that opportunity with the Cubs. So much of it was just right place, right time. I was coming out of law school. I'd done some internships. I'd worked in Major League Baseball. This would have been like fall of 2011. So Theo Epstein and Jed Hoyer had just been hired that fall, and really were just looking for some, young people out of school to work really hard and, be a small piece to what we were trying to do. So I joined in 2012. I was an intern, another internship. Again, like similar experience where just got thrown into a little bit of everything across player development, getting ready for the draft, some pro scouting, depending on the time of the year. Was just there to help however I could, and learn from some really talented people there. Obviously, Theo and Jed, but also guys like Jason McLeod, Matt Dory. Scott came on board after that 2012 season. So just the opportunity to get exposure in a bunch of different areas, learn from, listen from some really bright baseball minds who didn't mind the intern just asking questions, some of which may have been perceived as, naive. And that's how I learned, kind of work my way from there, more on the major league ops, baseball ops side. So again, doing a little bit of everything with a focus more on the major league side. I got, more versed in things like how the roster works, the CBA, transactions. That evolved more into pro scouting, eventually oversaw that department. And then from there, just got more opportunities. Theo and Jed were fantastic at just giving me exposure in different areas. Eventually got to that assistant GM level and started to turn my attention to, foundational things like how are we scouting? How are we tying that together with player development? How are we trying to funnel those things up to the major league level? So obviously, an informative period of my career, learned a ton. And like I said, more than anything, just thankful to have had those opportunities working with so many talented people in Chicago for that period of time.
From what I understand, too, it was helping to create some systems and some strategies with scouting, player development. Like, what does that actually look like? And how do you go from a guy who's doing a whole bunch of different things in an organization to, okay, this is what I'm really good at, and like this is where I can really excel? Like, how do you find that, and what does it look like?
Yeah, I think, we talk about it a lot here, just the importance of connectivity between all the different functions of your organization and, how to connect, how you're scouting to how you're developing your players and how you're connecting those things to what's going on at the major league level. How are you fostering the right environments to create those connections? It sounds relatively easy. I think it's actually pretty hard to do. I think in some ways it's become more difficult just as we've gotten more, there's more technology producing more information. We have so many bright people across the organization in different areas, different specialties, taking that information, extracting analysis and insights from that information, and then bringing it all back together to inform how we're making good decisions, how we're taking that information, really filtering it to our coaches and ultimately to our players, to put our players in the best position possible to get better through every step of the way. There's a lot that goes into that from, a system standpoint, from a process standpoint, from a culture standpoint. And it takes a lot of work. We spent a ton of time talking through how to continually make those things better. I don't think you ever really reach a point where you feel like you finished or you've crossed the finish line and you have it figured out. I think it's a constant evolution, but I think that experience at the Cubs, that broad-based experience was super helpful. I think going into hockey, going into a different sport and trying to solve similar problems in a sport you haven't really seen before was really illuminating, really useful. And again, things we're constantly talking about here as well.
So you go from the Cubs in baseball to the Blackhawks in hockey, and then Scott Harris comes after you. You guys obviously, worked together for a long time with the Cubs, going back to when you were both pretty young in this job, in this industry. Did you figure that you might be asked to become the Tigers general manager after Scott became the president of baseball operations, just because there's such a long history between you guys?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't really something that I gave too much thought to, in part just because I was really, really busy at the Blackhawks, and Scott was obviously, he jumped into things here and was really busy. So I think it was a case where both of us were really focused on what we were doing. Like I said earlier, was really enjoying what I was doing in hockey with the Blackhawks and was really focused on just doing everything I could to help that organization move things forward. And so it wasn't necessarily something I was expecting. Obviously, Scott and I had, a long history, a really good relationship from the 7+ years we worked together at the Cubs. So I think it made those conversations, once that process started, it made those conversations a little easier just to have that history, that familiarity. And obviously when I came on board, we were able to hit the ground running. But it wasn't necessarily something I was expecting before the process began.
What was it like when you got that phone call? And then ultimately, like, what led to the decision, hey, I want to leave the Blackhawks and go to the Tigers and, return to baseball? But then also, too, what are things that you learned in hockey that you're carrying with you now?
Yeah, obviously was excited to get the phone call. I think anytime somebody, asks you to be considered for a position like this, it's an honor. It's exciting. Put a lot of work into, figuring out how I could help Scott and the Tigers, and really enjoyed just those conversations and that process. Like I said, it wasn't, I was really focused on what I was doing. On the hockey side, I very easily could have seen myself staying, just given, some of the things we were doing there. Was really proud of some of the foundational stuff we were able to build, that the Blackhawks really enjoyed working with Kyle Davidson in the group with the Blackhawks. We're going through a rebuilding process there, and that wasn't easy, but did some pretty exciting times did some pretty exciting things in the time I was there. So, when I got the call, it required a lot of thought, and it was one of those things where the relationship I had with Scott, the history that we had with each other, the clear momentum that was being created here in Detroit, the opportunity to do something special with people that I really respected and thought highly of, that was just something I couldn't pass up. So was thrilled to get the opportunity. In terms of things I learned from hockey and how to apply them here, I think a lot of it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of just trying to build those foundational things that leads to creating a healthy organization. How can you create that connection from, your scouting group to your development group? How do you funnel those things up to whether it be the major league level or the NHL level? How do you bring all your people together to do those things most effectively, to support how you're making decisions, how you're creating an environment for your players to succeed and get better? And they're obviously completely different sports, but I think there's a lot of commonality in terms of how you can go about trying to create those things. So again, I think doing those things, coming from baseball, going into a brand new sport like hockey, trying to, tackle some of those challenges in a new sport where you have to learn a new environment, learn the culture. It was useful. And then coming back to baseball and applying some of those things. Again, it's not easy. We spent a ton of time constantly trying to find ways to make it better. But those were experiences that I think have served me well.
With that being said, you've had to design systems to help meet the visions of, teams in the past, right? Now, this is your vision. This is Scott's vision. What are some of those systems, and how does it feel to have that level of responsibility now with the Tigers?
Yeah, no, it's an exciting opportunity. I think I said this at my opening press conference. One of the things that made this opportunity so exciting was there's a lot of good things being done here across the organization. And it was really clear just going through, the interview process to come here, some of the things that were in place, some of that momentum that you could really feel and observe on the scouting end, on the development end. Obviously, some of the progress that took place at the major league level last year. I think a lot of what we're trying to do is just continue to move those things forward, continue to try to create connection across the organization to, foster consistently good decision-making, create that environment of relentless development where we know, regardless of where a player is on his timeline, whether we're talking about an 18-year-old in rookie ball or a major league veteran with the big league club who's been around for a while, we're creating that environment where they're in the best position possible to succeed. And those are challenging things to try to get right and push forward. You never feel like you have it all figured out, but to come into that environment and have those opportunities with Scott and AJ and our entire leadership group, it's exciting stuff.
So you become the Tigers general manager in September 2023, and then you have your first offseason, and it's a lot of additions. Mark Canha, Kenta Maeda, Jack Flaherty, Shelby Miller, Andrew Chafin, Gio Urshela, even as a late signee in spring training. How do you feel about the offseason as a whole and the areas of needs that you addressed?
Yeah, I think like I said earlier, we were pretty intentional with what we tried to do, focusing on that run prevention side of things. So, signing Flaherty and Maeda for the rotation, Shelby Miller and Chafin in the pen, and then adding some veteran presence to the lineup. So acquiring Mark Canha via trade very early in the offseason. I think that was the first weekend after the World Series. And then obviously being able to add Gio late heading into spring training. I think that was the product of a pretty intentional approach coming into the offseason to address specific needs that we felt could supplement our group, and obviously happy with what we were able to do to bring those guys in. I think they balance out our group well. I think we've seen early the contributions all of those guys have been able to make. So it was nice to bring them in. It's obviously feels good to have them here now.
When you're making decisions in free agency, something that I've always been interested in understanding is like, how do you guys as a front office decide what players are the right players to go after and at what price points? Like Jack Flaherty at $14 million or Luis Severino at $13 million or maybe more in that case, or Gio Urshela at $1.5 million or Whit Merrifield at $8 million plus a team option. Like those are just examples, but generally speaking, how do you guys decide these are the players we need to go after and, this is the right price for these players? Like, how do you figure that out? How do you balance that?
Yeah, I think it's, it's the product of a lot of work from a lot of people in the organization. I think it starts with obviously identifying our needs and what we're trying to go after to really supplement our roster to make us better. And then there's the evaluation piece of evaluating the players, identifying who potentially fits those needs. And then from there, you move into, decision-making and execution mode. And obviously there's a market component to that, but every phase of those conversations is really a group effort, obviously led by Scott and myself and AJ and our entire group, not only at the leadership level, but, throughout the organization, our analyst group, our scouting group, our development and performance groups. Those are all conversations and decisions that require a lot of inputs from a lot of different places across the organization to put ourselves in the best position to have as much information as possible to make good decisions. And some of that, goes back to the conversation on just the importance of creating connection across the organization, because those decisions, they don't just get made, in a room on a whim with a few of us. There's a lot that goes into those things, and it may happen in stages, and at times it requires patience and a lot of work, but that's in general what we're trying to do.
I'm curious to get your thoughts on some of the pieces on offense that were already in this organization even before Scott got here, before you got here. Spencer Torkelson, Riley Green, Kerry Carpenter. We see those guys in the middle of the order quite a bit. How can those guys continue to develop at the big league level? And I know they're all different players, but what steps can they take to really reach their full potential?
Yeah, I think, those guys are three prime examples when we talk about, having young position players in the middle of our lineup. We're going to give those guys, opportunity and runway. I think all three of those guys took a significant step forward last year. If we're going to produce runs, those three guys are obviously going to be a big piece of that. And like we were talking about earlier, there's going to be some inconsistency with a lineup that has young players in the middle of it, but we feel like that's what's best for this organization, both in the short term and the long term, and creating that development runway, not just in the minor leagues, but continuing that process up here in Detroit. So I think, you'll continue to see it with those three guys. There's certainly other examples as well up here in Detroit and, in places like Erie and Toledo.
Yeah, you mentioned Erie and Toledo. Before we get you out of here, I got to ask about two prospects that everybody are looking at. A lot of them, obviously, people are checking out, but Jace Young in AAA Toledo and then Jackson Jobe in AA Erie. What have been your thoughts on those two players so far, and any chance they could join the Tigers this season? And if so, what's the path for them to get here?
Yeah, I'll start with Jace. Obviously, I got a chance to see him for the first time really up close this spring, but he's, impressive the way he goes about his work. Very, intentional, competitive kid who, he wants to be really good. He's gotten off to a really good start in Toledo. We obviously asked him to start playing a new position at third base fairly recently, and he's handled that really well. Just going back to his work ethic, his intentions. He worked really hard this spring with Joey Cora. We talked a lot with Jackson and Jace about giving them Major League spring training as an opportunity to really just give them that exposure, give them that sense for what preparing at that level looks like. And I think both guys really took advantage of it. Jackson did as well. Obviously, he pitched in the prospect game. We brought him back for one game after that. But two guys who, are extremely competitive, who really took advantage of that opportunity in big league camp. And, at some point, in the not too distant future, both of those guys are going to have an opportunity to impact us up here in Detroit.
To wrap up, I know you mentioned it's less than 10% of the season in the books. We've seen 15 games. There are 147 games to go in the regular season. What are things we should be watching for with so much baseball left to be played?
Yeah, I think we're less than 10% of the season, but some of the things you've seen from our club so far this season, that resiliency, we've obviously, we've gotten really strong. Pitching, our rotations kept us in games. Our bullpen's been huge in high leverage situations. Our defense has been critical. It's won us some games. Offensively, we've found a way to scratch out runs when we need them. Continue to see development on that side of things. So I think you've seen the DNA of this club. We've got a young group with some veterans there as well. I think we've shown. We came into camp and then into the season prepared with some, really intentional work that got us to the starting line. And I think it served us well so far. So those are things that, we want to continue to see over the course of the next 147 games, and excited to see things play out.
All right. Well, we'll keep looking for those things. It has been interesting so far, but that's all we have for Jeff. We really appreciated your time. Hopefully we can get you back on the podcast at some point in the future.
Absolutely. No, this was fun. Appreciate you having me, Evan. Thank you.
Yeah, already looking forward to it. Thanks again for joining.
All right. Thanks.
Everyone, that was Jeff Greenberg, General Manager of the Detroit Tigers. There's more to discuss this week, but first, let's take a break.
Like to thank Jeff for coming on. You did a great job talking to him. One day, hopefully, we'll get somebody in the Tigers front office to give us a lot more secret sauce, but nobody likes to give Evan Mark the secret sauce, but they do like to talk to us. So, all right, I got a few questions that we need to get to. Let's talk a little Spencer Torkelson. Let's talk a little Spencer Torkelson defense, which had to do with yesterday's first game of the doubleheader. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Spencer Torkelson at the plate, which is not something I'm real anxious to do. But okay, so yesterday, Tigers lost the first game of a doubleheader. It's a game I pray in September we don't look back on and go, man, I wish we had that game back, because that was just a stone giveaway. It was a stone giveaway based on two defensive plays that they did not make. There was a play early in the game when Spencer Torkelson tried to turn a double play, could not do it. His pitcher was aggressively in Japanese telling him to throw home. He did not. That was the play. Cost him a run. But more importantly, there was a play late in the game when Spencer Torkelson went to third base. Byron Buxton was the runner, one of the fastest runners in Major League Baseball. He had no chance to get him. And if he would have just taken the out at first, it would have put runners at second and third, would have left the base open for the unbelievably wild Alex Lang, who at one point in time, I'm not sure how many strikes he'd thrown, but it wasn't many until he threw like 11 straight strikes to his last hitter. But it ended up Alex Lange struck. If he would have taken the out at first, Alex Lange struck out the next two hitters. They'd have been out of the inning down 5-4. It ended up being an 11-5 loss. Just everything totally was like a tsunami after that. But the bottom line is, it was just the play in the 12th inning was just a travesty. If you've played any real baseball in your life, you know, there are certain aspects pre-pitch that everybody has to say to themselves. You start learning this when you're about 11 years old, which is, if they hit the ball to me, what am I doing with it? Who's on base? I got to qualify the runner. So you know when a play happens, there isn't much decision to be made, even though it seems like there is. And I'm not sure exactly what Spencer Torkelson was doing, but holy smokes, what was he doing, Evan Petzold?
Yeah, it was definitely frustrating to see, especially in the 12th inning. Just to kind of run back through that play, Christian Vasquez drops a sacrifice bunt down the first base line. There are runners on first and second base with no outs. So Spencer Torkelson, he's creeping towards home plate as part of his pre-pitch movement, and he charges the bunted ball. Now, instead of getting the easy out at first, which would have, left the base open with wild Alex Lange on the mound, as we mentioned, Torkelson tried to get Byron Buxton, one of the fastest runners in baseball, advancing to third base. The throw was late. All three runners were safe. Lange walks the next batter with the bases loaded, making it 5-4 Twins. Now, if Torkelson would have gone and gotten the guy out at first base, right, if he would have turned and he would have thrown to get the guy at first, which there was an easy out right there, Alex Lange, that next walk would have been with first base open, which would have been a lot different than a walk with the bases loaded. And so, yeah, look, I think Spencer Torkelson got eager. He wanted to make a play that would have been a highlight reel type play. I think the combination of the bunt and then Buxton, and also the fact that, there were runners on, first and second trying to advance with Lange, an erratic reliever on the mound, like, it just wasn't the right decision. It was over aggressive. And I think the fact that he knew that there was a play at third base was probably, impressive, a good sign, a good sign of awareness of what's going on. But at the same time, Byron Buxton's really fast, and he outran him. And it also frustrated me what happened in the fifth inning too. And maybe a little bit different, but at the same time, Carlos Santana hits a ground ball down the first base line, and it forces Torkelson to charge the ball. Now, Kenta Maeda, he just committed a throwing error. He threw the ball into center field. It was really, really bad, and there were runners in the corners. But he's pointing for Torkelson, throw home, throw home, throw home. And there's a runner trying to score from third base. Instead, Torkelson turns to second base, tries to start the inning double play. They were actually pretty close to getting the double play, but Cole Keith wasn't able to hold onto the ball covering first base. He came over, awkwardly had to cover first base, and ultimately they weren't able to turn two. The tying run scores, and that's kind of what happens there, and it becomes a 2-2 game there in the fifth inning. But I think he probably would have been better off just throwing home in that situation. And I understand that, sure, like there was some chaos going on there because of the fact that Kenta Maeda had thrown the ball into center field just recently, and maybe Torkelson's trying to get out of it by turning two and thinks he has an opportunity to make a tough throw to second, then a tough throw to first to Cole Keith covering. But at the same time, like, just go home and get the guy out at home plate and don't allow the tying run to score. And that's kind of how I view it. And look, Torkelson, wherever you think about those two plays, like there were two plays that happened in the game. Ultimately, the defensive play that cost the Tigers was when, again, we mentioned Alex Lange having that long battle with Ryan Jeffers and finally figured out how to throw pitches inside the strike zone. And he does that. Ball's hit to Zach McKinstry at third base. He plays the hop terribly, and the ball gets by him underneath his glove and goes into the left field corner. Twins score a bunch of runs. Like that's why it was an 11-5 final in 12 innings. You rarely ever see anything like that. But it was Zach McKinstry's mistake that ultimately cost him the game. But at the same time, Spencer Torkelson could have been a little bit better defensively, I think, especially on that play in the 12th inning. I understand what he was trying to do in the fifth, going for the double play, but man, in the 12th inning, to try to go get Buxton, I just don't understand why he did that. And I think that was a play that ultimately really hurt the Tigers in that one. That's the difference between, the game being 4-4 and the game being 5-4. And that changes a lot of different things in the way in which, the rest of that game is handled. So it was frustrating to see. And man, I'm still scratching my head with Torkelson at first base. Sometimes it's frustrating.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor it. It's late in the pod, and I think we've said our piece about it. All right, let's touch a little bit about Spencer Torkelson, the hitter, because really, if Spencer Torkelson's not going to hit, it's going to really be a problem for the Detroit Tigers because they're going to keep sending him out there. I'm actually kind of shocked that they continue to hit him as high in the lineup as they do, but it also speaks to how many holes they have in the lineup because it's not like they got a lot of choices. So they're trying to keep in perspective, it's only 65, 70 at-bats. It's early in the year. They don't want to hurt his confidence, but I don't think it's a mystery what the problems are with Spencer Torkelson. There's 4 letters, L-A-T-E. He's late. He's late on everything. I actually saw him late on a slider yesterday. So I don't think Spencer Torkelson doesn't know this. I just don't think he knows yet how to fix it. Lastly, we're 1,000 at-bats plus into Spencer Torkelson's career. He's got a sub-220 batting average. And it's concerning. It's concerning that things we thought we left behind in 2022 are now cropping up again. Do I think he'll fix it? I would say there's better than a 50% chance he'll fix it. But, I don't think we can take for granted that he's going to fix it.
But what does fixing it really mean? That's the big question, right? I mean, is fixing it just getting back to what we saw last year when he was a guy who was able to give the Tigers 31 home runs and heat it up towards the end of the season? I mean, when he gets his timing, Torkelson can be good and he can get to that power and he can do some real damage. But if he's not getting to his timing and if pitchers are keeping him off balance by, maybe painting the outside, edge of the strike zone more so than throwing in pitches inside, that's kind of a issue for his swing mechanics to be able to go out there and get those pitches. And that leads him to chase pitches that are down and away. He likes those pitches inside. He likes to be able to turn on them. But if they're not giving him to him, how is he going to be able to time those things up if he's not even getting those pitches? Like that's the bothersome thing to me. Also, the fact that he's hitting 222 with absolutely no power. Sure, he's got some doubles, but we haven't seen that home run power that we're so used to, based on the second half of last season. Then also the fact that he didn't do a whole lot in spring training either. He hit 137 with 5 walks and 20 strikeouts in 57 plate appearances in spring training. He still hasn't hit a home run yet this season. So yes, he has come up in some big moments. He has delivered, but he's chasing way too much and he's not on time. And that's the problem is if he's not on time and if he's chasing too much, that's a problem. That's not good. We need to see him on time doing damage and obviously not chasing. And the chase is the biggest issue for me is when he's going outside the zone, that tells me that he's not getting pitches that he likes to hit, which are inside, but you got to be a little bit more adaptable with the swing. And so that brings me back to the same topic that I talked a lot about in the 2022 season when I wondered, hey, is it a swing mechanic flaw? And, because it's the same groove swing over and over and over again. Well, if guys are going to pitch you inside and you're going to chase too much outside, you're not going to force them to throw the ball inside to you if you're chasing outside. So I don't know. Ultimately, is a swing mechanic issue? I don't know. Is it a timing issue? I don't know. It seems like it's a whole lot of both. And I'm left scratching my head as to what this guy's really going to be this season. I hope the best for him. He's a good guy. I want to see him succeed because it's a fun team to watch when Spencer Torkelson is raking. We saw that at the end of last season, but so far we're not seeing it yet, and that's frustrating.
All right, I'll just remind you. You know who makes mistakes? Pitchers make mistakes. So we can say all we want that, he's not going to see any pitches, on the inner half where he likes. Guess what? Pitchers make mistakes all the time. Good hitters, they make them pay when they make mistakes. Spencer Torkelson isn't making anybody pay these days. That's the bottom line. It reminds me way too much of 2022. That's all I got to say about it. Prove me wrong. Do I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel? I think there's more a light at the end of the tunnel in the Javi Baez swing right now than the Spencer Torkelson swing. Do with that sentence what you may. All right. So we got a pretty interesting outing from Matt Manning yesterday, who did nothing to prove. I mean, did everything. When you watch Matt Manning throw now, there's no doubt he belongs in the major leagues. I don't think anybody would disagree with that idea. Until he spun one in the middle of the plate, he was actually really damn good. Threw 9 balls in the first inning. I think he threw 12 balls in the next 5 innings. That's how good his command was. Got a pretty decent amount of swing and miss. Probably the best slider I've ever seen him have. He was damn good until he left one in the middle of the plate. And the question is, How long can they keep pseudo representing the idea that Matt Manning's in the rotation, but he's not? And how long is it before they got to figure out what to do about it? Because it's hard to say he's not one of the best 5 pitchers they have. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately going to be determined by what this extended pitching competition looks like. I don't think the Tigers are going to make any moves to move away from Casey Mize or Reese Olson this early in the season. They're going to give them a lot of opportunities to just do what they do and try to be the best versions of themselves. And we know Kenta Maeda is not going anywhere. He's got a big contract. Jack Flaherty obviously isn't going anywhere. He's making $14 million. And Tarek Skubal's elite. So those guys aren't going anywhere. It's up to Reese Olson and Casey Mize. Like, if they continue to pitch well and if they continue to take steps forward, we're going to continue to see those guys in the rotation. Matt Manning is literally like a 6th starter without really having a 6th starter. And it sucks for him. He's in a tough spot. I mean, again, imagine, coming off of his start that he made in New York. Again, he's obviously taking advantage of these rainouts and these doubleheaders because he's able to be called up as the 27th man. But after the start he made in New York against the Mets, he said that he had some things to button up before he faced the Indianapolis Indians in AAA, obviously. And turns out he never faced the Indianapolis Indians because he was scratched. The Tigers were preparing for some poor weather, and then he was able to start the doubleheader against the Minnesota Twins, and he pitched very, very well. And so he's stuck in between. I feel bad for him because he is a big league pitcher, no doubt about it, 100%. And his time is going to come at some point. But it sucks that he's down there in the minor leagues and he's not able to get his service time and he's not able to get his opportunities when he deserves to be in the big leagues. On some team, in some capacity, there is no doubt Matt Manning deserves to be in the big leagues. But it's going to take a Casey Mize meltdown or a Reese Olson meltdown for Matt Manning to get his real opportunity. I do think, though, what we saw against the Twins was really positive, also a little bit concerning. I don't like the fact that he gave up 2 home runs. That was something he struggled with in spring training, but man, oh man, the stuff was nasty. The fastball looked really good. He paired it great with that sweeper. I know he's got the bullet slider as well. He also has the splitter. He has the curveball. He didn't use those 3 pitches as much as he used the fastball and the sweeper, but he was still really good. And I think that's a really good sign if you're a Tiger fan and you're looking at this rotation right now and you say, okay, they have 5 guys who are already in the big league rotation. Oh, yeah, and then there's Matt Manning, too. I mean, you feel pretty good about what the Tigers have overall, and Matt Manning is going to factor in at some point. I believe it wholeheartedly. Matt Manning will be a regular member of the Tigers rotation at some point in the 2024 season. When that is, I don't know. Matt Manning doesn't know, but I think he's done a really good job of handling it. He's been as much of a pro about it as he can be, considering the fact that he's kind of getting the short end of the stick and it's not really fair.
Quickly, I watched Skeens versus Montero the other day in AAA. Paul Skeens faced the Toledo Mud Hens, and Kyler Montero was pretty damn good, to be really honest with you. I mean, that's going to be a major league pitcher here pretty soon. I do want to talk about, for just 1 minute, Javi Baez before we get the heck out of here. I watched an interview with Javi Baez after the game, and if you didn't see it, I suggest you try to go back and see it, which Javi Baez, who's hitting, I think, 140, played really good defense, did a homer today. They asked him all the tough questions today, and I got to tell you, if you want to know the definition of what a professional in baseball is, Javi Baez was the definition of a professional today. Were you in that scrum or no today?
Of course I was, Mark. And Javi Baez was asked about the boos and the negativity from the fans that he's been receiving all season long, which is a lot different than the boos and the negativity that he gets when he goes to Chicago. That's a different type of boo. That is a, haha, we hate you because you used to be a Cub and you won a World Series and you were on the north side, blah, blah, blah. There's also some playful boos because there are some fans in Chicago who might support the White Sox who appreciated what Javi Baez did with the Cubs. It's a playful game. It's different in Chicago. It's different in LA. He likes that villain role. But when he's at home at Comerica Park, I don't think Javi Baez likes the boo so much. And I understand that the fans are going to boo him because he's swinging his sliders and the other side of the batter's box. I get it. But Javi Baez was asked about it. Here's what he said. I'm going to read you the quote. Quote, I know it's frustrating for the fans, but I think that doesn't really help the team and the organization. If we grind together, we should stand up together. We should stay together when we're down, end quote. He also talked about the fact that, quote, I don't think it's respectful when people trash talk and disrespect you behind the net where they can say anything, end quote. I think that's very true. We also talked more about, if the fans boo, it's fine, but the cussing and stuff like that is a little bit too much, especially with kids in the stands. Javi Baez, his 2 kids are at a lot of games, and I'm sure they've heard a lot of bad things said about their father, and that's a little bit frustrating. I don't like that at all, actually. But still, he handled it like a pro. I think he addressed it well. But yeah, I get it. I understand that the fans are going to be pissed, and no matter what I say on here, they're going to continue to boo him. But I don't know, man. It's a little bit crummy to think that Javi Baez has to take this day in and day out. I don't know, man. He's getting paid a lot of money, but he's also playing really good defense. And I know fans want to see more out of him at the plate, but I don't know. What good does booing really do? I'm not so sure it does any good.
I get everybody's frustrated. I know I trash talk plenty too, but at the same time, thought he handled it like a pro. All right, it's time to get out of here. Been a long pod. I want to remind everybody to please rate, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, you name it, anywhere. You can always find us embedded in every Evan Petzold article at freep.com. Spread the word, and we appreciate everybody listening. I'd like to thank our executive producers, Kirk Crawford and Anjanette Delgado, and the Free Press editor, Nicole Avery Nichols. Our producer, the man who makes us sound great, even though we don't sound great, Robin Chan. Love to my grandson, Braden Michael Gorash, and the spectacular Savannah Petzold. Till next week, I'd like to remind everybody, peace!